Abadi at Cedar Ridge Regional Trauma Center knew where Maren Voss came from. She had appeared 18 months earlier with a transfer file from a small clinic in Alaska, a nursing license that checked out clean, and a silence that unsettled people more than it should have. She worked nights. She never took vacation. She flinched, just slightly, whenever a helicopter passed low over the hospital roof, and then she would catch herself and go back to charting vitals as if nothing had happened. The younger nurses whispered that she'd survived something terrible. The older ones just left her alone, because in this line of work, everyone was running from something, and nobody had the right to ask. What none of them knew, what nobody in that hospital could have guessed, was that 6 years earlier, Maren Voss had gone by a different name, in the mountains of a country she was not allowed to name. In briefings so classified they didn't officially exist, she had been known only by a call sign, Widow. She was the medic who went in when helicopters couldn't land, who worked by moonlight and instinct, who had pulled more men out of collapsing buildings and burning vehicles than she could count on both hands. Widow was a ghost story that operators told each other in low voices. The medic who never lost a patient once she got hands on them. The one who disappeared without a trace after her last deployment. The one some believed had died in the very operation that made her legend. She had let them believe it. It was easier than explaining why she had walked away. Easier than carrying the weight of the men she couldn't save alongside the ones she could. She had traded a rifle-slung vest for scrubs, traded operational call signs for a name nobody would recognize, and built herself a small, quiet life stitched together out of 12-hour shifts and bad hospital coffee. That life ended on a Tuesday afternoon in July. The scanner in the break room crackled with a Priority 1 incoming call. Mass casualty, military transport inbound, ETA 4 minutes. Maren was already moving before the announcement finished, snapping on gloves, wheeling a gurney toward the ambulance bay doors as the building trembled with the low, familiar thunder of rotor blades. She stepped out into the sun just as a Black Hawk cleared the tree line above the access road, its downwash bending the grass flat, and behind it, a convoy of armored vehicles kicked up a wall of dust as it roared up the gravel drive. She had seen this exact scene 100 times in another life. Her stomach tightened before her mind even caught up to why. For men came through the dust first, moving fast despite exhaustion carved into every line of their faces, carrying a stretcher between them with the practiced, brutal efficiency of men who had done this before under fire. Blood soaked through the fabric beneath the wounded man's legs. The lead operator, broad-shouldered, jaw tight, one hand raised as he shouted orders to the men behind him, locked eyes with Maren for exactly 1 second as he closed the distance. And in that second, something in his expression cracked wide open. He staggered just slightly, like a man who had seen a ghost in broad daylight. "No," he said, almost too quiet to hear over the rotor wash. "No, it's not possible." The rest of the team didn't understand what was happening. They kept moving, kept shouting vitals, kept pressure on the wound. But this man, their team leader, the one they called Reyes, stared at Maren Voss the way a drowning man stares at a rope he thought had been cut years ago. "Widow," he breathed. "You're supposed to be dead." Maren's whole body went cold. 6 years of careful silence, of controlled breathing, of never once letting her old name pass her lips even in her sleep, all of it cracked in an instant, right there in the ambulance bay, in front of a hospital full of people who knew her only as the quiet night nurse. She had exactly one heartbeat to decide what kind of person she was going to be for the rest of this day. She could deny it. She could claim a case of mistaken identity, let the chaos of the moment carry the accusation away like everything else that happened in a trauma bay. Or she could do the only thing that had ever mattered to her, the only thing that had built the legend in the first place. She could save the man bleeding out on that stretcher. "Get him inside," she said, and her voice had changed. Flattened, sharpened, become something the hospital staff had never once heard from her. Now, the team didn't hesitate, even Reyes, even in his shock. Some instinct older than memory told them to trust the voice giving the order. They surged through the doors behind her, and the emergency room exploded into motion as Maren tore open the wounded man's uniform and found the wound instantly, her hands moving with a certainty that had nothing to do with hospital protocol, and everything to do with 6 years of trying to forget exactly this kind of skill. "Femoral, not the artery, we're lucky," she said, mostly to herself, already packing the wound with practiced pressure. 2 units, O negative now. Get me a surgeon who doesn't ask questions. A junior doctor froze in the doorway, stunned by the transformation of the mousy night nurse into someone giving orders like she'd commanded rooms like this her entire career. Because she had. Long before Cedar Ridge, long before Scrubs, Maren Voss had commanded rooms exactly like this one, except the walls had been canvas and the enemy had been close enough to hear breathing. Reyes stood in the doorway, blood on his hands, disbelief written across every feature of his face. Watching the woman the whole special operations community had quietly mourned for 6 years' work with the same terrifying calm that had once saved his life on a mountainside he still dreamed about. "It really is you," he said. Maren didn't look up from the wound. "I need you to leave this room," she said. "I need you to leave this room, and I need you to not say another word about who I used to be. Not to him. Not to anyone." But even as she said it, she already understood something with cold, sinking certainty. The past she had buried under 6 years of silence had just walked through her doors bleeding, and there would be no putting it back in the ground. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Chapter 2 is where the truth about Widow's past finally comes out, and it changes everything. Buried. They took the wounded man. His name was Danny Cortez, 26 years old, a communications specialist on his second deployment, into surgery 40 minutes after Maren stabilized him in the trauma bay. The surgeon on call, a steady, unflappable man named Dr. Okafor who had seen every kind of chaos a hospital could produce, pulled Maren aside afterward and told her, flatly, that if she hadn't packed that wound the way she had, Cortez would have bled out before the surgical team ever got their hands on him. He didn't ask where she'd learned to do that. He had a feeling the answer wasn't something she was ready to give, and some things in medicine you learn not to push. Reyes found her an hour later in the empty family consultation room, sitting alone with her hands still faintly trembling from the adrenaline crash that always came after, the same crash that used to hit her in dusty forward operating bases half a world away. He closed the door behind him. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then he sat down across from her, and the exhaustion in his face wasn't just physical anymore. "I carried you out of a collapsed building in Kandahar province," he said quietly. "You had shrapnel in your shoulder, and you were still trying to work on the guy next to you. You saved 11 men in 14 hours that week. I know because I counted. Everyone counted. And then you were gone. The official story was Kia. We had a memorial. I spoke at it." His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and Maren finally looked up and met his eyes. "I wasn't Kia," she said. "I just couldn't be Widow anymore." She told him then, in the quiet of that small room, what she had never told another living soul, how the operation that made her a legend was also the one that broke something in her that never fully healed. 2 men had died on her table that night, despite everything she did, despite the 11 she'd saved in the days before. She had stopped being able to tell the difference between saving lives and simply postponing loss. The command had offered her a medal and a promotion to train the next generation of combat medics. She had taken a fake identity from a sympathetic officer who owed her his life, and disappeared instead, because she had decided that the only way to survive her own legend was to become someone small enough that nobody would ever expect anything of her again. Cedar Ridge Regional had been supposed to be exactly that, small, quiet, invisible. Reyes listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he didn't offer platitudes or thank her again for Cortez. Instead, he said something that cut straight through 6 years of careful hiding. "You didn't disappear because you got weak," he said. "You disappeared because you were the only one who never let yourself stop feeling it. The rest of us built walls. You just built a smaller life instead." Maren felt something in her chest give way at that. Not collapse but release, like a wound finally being properly drained after being sealed too tight for too long. Word moved fast through a hospital, faster still through a special operations community that had spent 6 years quietly grieving a legend. By the time Danny Cortez came out of surgery successfully stable, expected to make a full recovery, half his unit had heard the story of the trauma nurse who had once been Widow, and they came to find her, not to expose her, but simply to see her, to confirm with their own eyes that the ghost they'd mourned was real and breathing and had just saved one of their own. One by one, exhausted, dust-covered men filed quietly past the nurse's station, some just nodding to her, one older sergeant saluting without a word. And Maren realized, watching them, that she had spent 6 years running from a legacy she had never actually needed to be ashamed of. Cortez woke up 2 days later, groggy and disoriented, and the first thing Reyes told him, once the kid was lucid enough to understand, was that the nurse who'd worked on him in that trauma bay was the same medic whose stories had been passed down through the teams for years, half myth, half memorial. Cortez, still weak, still tethered to monitors, simply said, "I knew someone was different about her hands. They didn't shake. Everyone's hands shake." Maren, standing in the doorway, allowed herself, for the first time in 6 years, something close to pride instead of guilt. She didn't go back to the teams. She didn't reclaim the call sign, didn't put the uniform back on, didn't trade the quiet rhythm of hospital shifts for deployments again. But something had shifted permanently the day the SEALs carried Danny Cortez through her doors. She stopped flinching at helicopters. She let herself talk occasionally to the veterans who came through Cedar Ridge's doors, sharing pieces of a past she'd kept locked away for years, and found that the sharing didn't break her the way she'd always feared it would. It did the opposite. The hospital staff never got the full story, not really, but they noticed the change. The quiet nurse who used to eat lunch alone now sat with the Veterans Outreach Group on Thursdays, and there was a steadiness in her now that had nothing to do with hiding and everything to do with finally being seen. Widow had been a legend built on saving men in the worst moments of their lives. Maren Voss, it turned out, had simply needed someone to remind her that the woman behind the call sign deserved saving too. This is the kind of story we love bringing you. Real heart, real stakes, and characters worth remembering. If you enjoyed Widow's journey, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story we tell. Drop a comment and let us know what part hit you hardest. We read every single one.